instead of prioritizing tasks and operations, it prioritizes creating relationships and making that the top priority of your operational effort. When you do this at first, it feels terrifying. It literally, it feels like you're doing something wrong. You're going to probably feel some guilt. You're going to wonder, why am I doing this? You may even fear for your job.
Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple, a practical podcast that guides clinical leaders and healthcare managers to create trust and support with their teams. I'm your host, Trace Hobson. Join me for weekly interviews, practical tools, and inspiring transformational stories of bringing people together in healthcare. Now, let's dive in.
Would you like to help your team move from burnout to breakthrough, or to develop trust with people on your team that may be challenging or that are struggling because of what's going on in healthcare today? Well, that's easier said than done in situations and circumstances where maybe trust has eroded and toxicity is there. So what do you actually do? This is a question that I spent a lot of time thinking about. And so in today's episode, I'm talking with you about relational equity and how to build it on a team. Now, if you stay to the end, I'm also going to share with you how to get access to a free ebook that I created called From Burnout to Breakthrough: How to Create Relational Equity on Healthcare Teams. Now, without further ado, let's get right into today's show. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Safe Space Made Simple. This podcast was something that I started to generate a safe space for clinical leaders, managers, and executives to come together and talk about what it is that they're doing in our healthcare system in British Columbia to create and generate a safe space for themselves and for others. One of the things that I've been working with over the last couple of years is this idea of transitioning from a command and control or hierarchical approach to leadership to something that works in a complex, complexicated and VUCA environment. And that's the idea of relational equity. Now, relational equity and equality go together. But what I'm really talking about when I use that term is that I'm differentiating between two very distinct approaches to leadership. The first approach is one that I've had for many years and have had to transition and change around, and that is to be incredibly task-oriented, to be sort of critical path management oriented and looking at cause and effect solutions and how to get from point A to point B to point C. And to do that in a way that is really focused on the tasks, not as much on the people. This served me for many, many years. And if you're relating to this and you've used this kind of leadership in your approach, or this kind of management in your approach, it's probably served you as well. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't want to give the impression that I think that that's a bad thing or it's wrong. But I do know that in this VUCA world that we're in, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world and organizations that we're in, and especially in Canadian healthcare, that things are moving at such a different rate of speed. Things are ambiguous, they are complex and uncertain, and they are definitely volatile at times in rapidly changing circumstances, organizations. This is an ongoing reality for clinical leaders, managers, and healthcare executives. And so the old approach of command and control or hierarchical approaches might seem like they work, but they actually don't, because when we involve people and projects that demand different approaches than what we've used in the past, belief systems, cultures, different ways of looking at the world, we have entered into a complex situation, and the old critical path management doesn't work anymore, because point A doesn't lead to point B. It leads to point J, and then it goes to point K or L. It goes to B. We don't know oftentimes what will actually work. So this is the first distinction of relational equity, is the idea that the old way of managing tasks and managing operations and leading within those complex environments isn't working as much as it used to. And we're in this liminal space between 2 points. We've got the old that isn't working anymore and we're moving to somewhere new. Well, one thing that I've noticed that is the juxtaposition to what I'm describing is having a more relational approach. And this happens when when I've had to sort of bite the bullet and tie a knot and leave my office closed and my email closed and move out into the field or onto the floor and spend time with the people that I work with, not with an agenda to get more things done, but with an agenda to actually connect with people and get to know them and understand how I might support them and help them to do the work that they're there to do. And leaders who make this transition discover something profound. When you move from a command and control task oriented approach to something that's more relationally based and is based on creating and developing relational equity, you start to get all the operational things done in a distinctly different and more vibrant way. The people that you want to work with or that you need to work with on your team begin to notice you and experience you in a different way when you show up primarily with your presence and you show up with a primary agenda of getting to know them and supporting them to be the best that they can be. Now, I'm not going to lie, this doesn't actually change things next week. It takes time. It's simple, but it's not easy. And it's something that takes courage and compassion and self acceptance, vulnerability, and awareness to be able to do this. Conscious awareness is a key to making the transition that I'm describing. And so when you start to look at the possibility of doing this, you're going to want to go, well, what's the business case? What's the ROI? And that's where I came up with this idea of relational equity. It's a term that really, instead of prioritizing tasks and operations, it prioritizes creating relationships and relational equity and equality with everyone and making that the top priority of your operational effort. And when you do this at first, it feels terrifying. It literally, it feels like you're doing something wrong. You're going to probably feel some guilt. You're going to wonder, why am I doing this? You may even fear for your job because some of the things you're going to be doing are going to be pressing pause on the KPI activities or the OKR activities and pressing play on developing relationship with your people that's vibrant. And the first objection that I always hear from clients, and I heard from myself as well, is, okay, that's great, but where do I find the time to get all the things done that I need to get done when I'm doing this with my people and developing relational equity? Well, that's a great question. At first, as I said, it's not easy. Over time, the exponential results that you get, the ROI on relational equity, far outstrips anything that you can do in command and control models because we're not talking about something linear. We're talking about something that is non-local. And when you decide to do this with your people and develop relationships, you can't possibly predict how it is that you're going to get things done. But I can guarantee that things will get done in a different and more vibrant way. People begin to put their hands in the air and volunteer for things, people that will surprise you as well, that maybe even were resisting you before, start to actually show up in a different way because you as a leader decided to create a safe space and generate that for yourself and with your people. The relational equity starts to rise and people get the heart of who you are instead of just constantly being in task mode. When that happens over time, it might take as long as 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. Eventually, though, people begin to experience you and want to help you and are inspired and enrolled to do just that. There are 3 phases or steps that you can take to build relational equity. And a lot like the Russian nesting dolls, if we go, from the largest phase to the next phase to the first phase, it's about relational equity that starts to become built and developed inside of you. So, how do you do that? How do you build relational equity inside of you? Well, the first place to start is to notice the activations that happen when you start to consider doing what I'm describing. As you start to consider what I'm saying and you start to think that through and how you might actually do it, invariably there's going to be a number of different things that comes up as resistance. And there are three categories for resistance that come up. The first one is complaints. You're going to have complaints about this, or you're going to have criticisms about it, or you're going to have condemnations about it. And all of those are fine. There's nothing wrong with any of those. All of those really are just a symptom of resistance to something new. And they're the thread to pull on to begin to work within yourself in the areas that are asking for relational equity inside of you. As you look at this, those ways of being that have been entrenched for a long time start to become unraveled when you turn the spotlight from shining out at the world to within yourself. And you start to look at what is it that is going on for me that is sort of igniting this complaint or this resistance to what this person is saying. Now, this is a common trait or a common experience that you'll notice. You might be noticing it right now in listening to this recording, or you might notice it in your day-to-day conversations where people can sometimes just become a bit of a means to an end and a box to tick off the list. You know, how's the weather today? How about those Canucks? How about this? How about that? You kind of go through the pleasantries and then you move into what you're really there for, which is the content or the task that you want to get done. Well, my suggestion is to actually notice what happens for you when you slow down to the speed of your presence, when you decide to be present with people. How is that for you? I know for me, when I first started to do this, it was incredibly activating and very, very difficult. I had trouble even just taking one deep breath and letting go of my agenda and the things that I had to get done and all the things, the phone in my pocket that was going off and the email I have to, you know, the deal. So at first, taking that deep breath, that first deep breath, that first conscious breath into your body begins to facilitate you to be able to notice the complaints and observe them from a different perspective than being sort of in them. And once you notice this complaint or a criticism or a condemnation, you can slow down and acknowledge that. You can also take a moment and appreciate the way that that has served you to be sort of in that complaint. It's probably driven you forward in different ways that has helped you. Nothing wrong with that. And you can probably take a moment and notice the ways that you can appreciate that this can become a trap for you as well. Or it's, you know, can you appreciate the ways that it's no longer serving? And so you take a moment to do that. Then you can actually take a moment to accept that everything is as it is, and resisting it is futile. It doesn't work. Can you change anybody around you? Can you change anything that's going on? I know that as I've had to come to terms with my own inability to change things, that was a rude awakening for me. But the truth is that I couldn't change anything or anyone. All I could change was happening inside of me. And so that's the place of appreciation and then acceptance. And when you accept that and let go of trying to make things different, does that provide you with a little bit more insight within yourself? And then you move into allowing and really slowing down even more and taking a deep breath and noticing, what is it that my system wants and needs right now? And who is that developing me to be? And what is that asking me to take as one step? As you move through this process and you exercise in this way, we're kind of going to the consciousness gymnasium and we're trying to get fit. We're doing consciousness CrossFit right now. As you practice this and you intentionally take the time to do it, you begin to develop relational equity within yourself. You'll notice that your self-acceptance, your self-love, and the ways in which you feel about yourself starts to shift and change and move. This is really important because I know for me, when I did this work at first, I didn't even realize, and I was unaware of the fact that I was not being very accepting towards myself, and that I oftentimes was beating myself up for things that were beyond my control. But when I started to slow down to the speed of my presence and do this kind of work, I noticed, wow, I actually can give myself what I need and want. I don't need anybody else to do that for me. I can actually do it. I don't need my boss to do it. I don't need my spouse to do it or my family to do it. I actually can give it to myself in the here and now. And this is what I call generating a safe space. And that relational equity starts with you. There's also a sense of equality that begins to raise in this work as well, because when you're in command and control, it can be dehumanizing for people. And so, what this does is it actually puts everybody on an even playing field. It doesn't matter whether you're a manager or a director, an executive. It doesn't matter whether you're on the front line of the work that you're doing or you're coordinating that work. Everyone is a human being and needs to be humanized and level, even though they might have different roles on the team. And so equality is connected to relational equity. And when you have relational equity that's building inside of you, you can begin to notice that everybody is equal in this situation. There's nobody higher or lower. We're all there to do a job. Now, when that happens, when teams actually feel that and they're with their boss and they feel equal to them, and their boss recognizes and acknowledges that everyone is equal to them as well, it creates a support system that is expansive. And so relational equity moves from the individual to now building it in the space between you and other people. You as a leader can go into those relational interactions and conversations recognizing that you're like everybody else, and then you can carry that forward in the space between. Now, Virginia Satir, one of the people that I admire that has passed away, that started systemic work and really was the first sort of subject matter expert that I followed to understand how to do systemic work within myself, within my family, and within my teams. She had a saying that went like this: it's peace within, peace between, and peace among. And what she was describing there is the three phases of relational equity that I'm talking to you about. So peace within is relational equity within myself. Peace between is relational equity in the most powerful space that we have between us and other people, and that's the relationship space. And then peace among is the collective, the larger community. In some cases, it's the team as well. And so relational equity, starting with you, then flows out to other people and is developed in the space between you and others in the way that you show up. And generating a safe space, a psychologically healthy and safe space, as well as a neurobiologically safe space, is critical to being able to be an advocate and somebody who embodies in the space between you and other people. Now, you can't make anybody feel safe, but you definitely can have an effect and an influence on whether or not people have the ability or the opening to step into generating their own safety in moments by moments. Now, we know this is true because when we're around people that are reactive, everybody feels it. Same thing when we are around people that are very intentional with building relational equity within themselves and then being an advocate for building that with other people. Now, the way that you build that relational equity with other people is by being primarily responsible for the way that you show up, by noticing those activations inside of yourself. There's a neurobiological practice that can happen that will facilitate, first of all, your own relational equity, like we just spoke about, but then that flows out of you and has an effect for the people that are around you in the space between. So the way you show up has a huge impact on your relationships with people, your relationship with your boss or with the people that you work with or the people that you live with. The way that you show up has a massive impact. So if you are focused on that internal practice and developing relational equity within yourself, especially when you're activated, that automatically begins to flow into the space between so that you can be curious with people at a deeper level. And you start to let go of the labels and the judgments and the agendas that you have. Now, they're not going to disappear overnight. And you don't have to not have those things. It's just about beginning to loosen your grip on them a little bit with one deep breath at a time so that you can hear and experience other human beings at face value and give them the benefit of the doubt and having positive regard for them. So, having positive regard, doing that internal work gives you the relational equity that starts to build peace between, like Virginia Satir talked about. Now, when you're working with relational equity and relational equality within yourself, and then you're working with that between you and other people, so peace within, peace between, the natural flow systemically is to move to peace among and start to enroll and invite others to practice with you that relational equity practice so that you can reach critical mass in a team environment. Now, practically speaking, this is done by generating a safe space within yourself, between other people, and then in a group setting as well by asking very intentional questions about what people need and want to feel safe, to feel respected, and to feel appreciated and valued in that space. And then actually following that up with actions that walk your talk and make sure that you're congruent in your actions and your words. When you do that, you practice that consistently within yourself and with people around you, it starts to build a critical mass for a team that creates a systemic ripple effect. People begin to have a support system in an environment like this where relational equity is used, and we start to move to a model of shared leadership that's based on relationship so that the leaders, the identified leaders, aren't doing everything by themselves. They're actually facilitating leadership that's going on at all levels within the team. This is built on a relational equity foundation because the only way to navigate complexity is to have a relationship with people. And if you think about it, when we're in really intense situations, if we have strong relationships with the people around us, everything just sort of falls away and we just do what is necessary, focusing on a primary purpose and focusing on what it is that we're wanting to do together. And all the other stuff falls away. Personality differences, conflicts, they're not important anymore because we're incredibly focused on our primary purpose and the reason why we're together. Now, when you work on relational equity within and between and among, what starts to happen is a support system that breathes life into the culture of a team. As you work on this, there's natural byproducts that start to show up that organizations are spending millions of dollars to try and manufacture. Things like engagement or retention or recruitment. These things happen naturally when we focus on developing relationships with each other and connections with each other that are real and vibrant. It's also in this kind of an environment where we walk up to issues and have powerful communications about what's working and what's not working and don't shrink back from anything. One of the misconceptions that people have of a safe space is that you're not really talking about anything that's relevant or real, and you're shrinking back from having tough conversations. Actually, the opposite is true. In a safe space, it creates a foundation and an environment where we walk up to everything and talk about all of it. And that also is connected to facilitating more intimate and deep relationships as well. And if you think about this, it really stands to reason when you're in a family, for instance, and the family has a fight or you have a fight with your spouse, it's always in the process of navigating those difficult times, those difficult conversations that people either come together and get deeper in their relationship or they separate and go in a different direction. And so what facilitates this is relational equity. When you decide to notice what your part is and stay on your side of the street, creating that relational equity internally so that you can show up in that space between in a way that really serves you and serves the people around you. And then also serves the collective and the larger system at the same time. All right, so that's the end of the content that I created for relational equity and equality. And it gives you some steps that you can take as well. And I hope that it served you. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to on LinkedIn or by email, and I'd be glad to have a conversation with you. Otherwise, as you go away from here and you start to practice this in your leadership and in your life, I hope and trust and encourage you to be a safe space. Thank you so much for listening to the end of the episode. I hope that it served you and that you enjoyed it. Now, for the ebook, the free ebook from burnout to breakthrough, how to create relational equity on healthcare teams, all you need to do is just scroll to the bottom of the show notes in this episode, and you'll see a link that you can use to download that free ebook. Now, once you download the ebook and take a look at it, please reach out to me and let me know how it impacted you and whether or not it served you. That really helps for me to know what kind of content to create that will support you going forward. All right, so go ahead and scroll to the bottom of the show notes and download that ebook and take a look at it to see how to take your team from burnout to breakthrough and to develop relational equity on your team. Thanks again so much for supporting our show and listening. And I look forward to when we meet either online or in person. But until then, remember to be a safe space.